Have you guys ever had one of those things where you're like, oh yeah, this is just like totally a thing that I know about and that I've done, and then you realize you can't remember why? That's what this week actually is for me. Not that I've never um, taught the Renaissance before, but in previous iterations of this class, I have I have taught sonnets. I have taught Petrarch. Um, I've spent an entire week on Machiavelli's The Prince. I love both of them. But whenever I was looking through the book, then I was like, yes, absolutely, the Heptameron. And I started going back and looking through my old syllabi and through my old notes, and I realized I've never actually taught the Heptameron before. I've taught Canterbury Tales. I've taught Boccaccio's Decameron. I've never taught the Heptameron. So I started going through my old syllabi from whenever I was an undergraduate because I saved them all in my Google Drive. Nothing there. I'm so excited. I had no idea when I read the Heptameron before. I know I did. I know that I know it. I have no idea why I know this. It must have been like I just decided to sit down and read it as like an optional reading for some project that I did somewhere along the line, 10, 15 years ago at this point. Or maybe I read it whenever I was in grad school just for fun because I got tired of working with all of those like heavy academic monographs. Anyway, I am I am so absolutely stoked for this week because it's going to be the first time I've gotten any kind of student interaction with the Heptameron before. Um, More to the point, the title of this unit in its current form is Renaissance's Precursors to Romanticism and and the Enlightenment. Um, because I do think that the Renaissance is important, don't get me wrong, but it's not like there was one single Renaissance. Like the way that we classically think of the Renaissance was basically just a bunch of Italian guys kind of pouncing around, doing their thing, to paraphrase Neil Gaiman, who we read some of for last week. Um, but I think it gets particularly interesting through the lens of the later movements that that it inspired, because Romanticism was one of the first American movements. Like it's not that there wasn't other romantic. It's not even that it started in America. Arguably, it was either British or German, depending on who we're counting as sort of like the original one. But it was one of the first global literary movements that also like took place here in the United States. I mean, Emerson and Thoreau, like their brand of romanticism, and we still see echoes of that even later in Robert Frost, and we're actually right now, like currently, um, in this post 2020 world that we're living in, I've actually seen a lot of echoes of romanticism kind of coming back out of the woodwork, quite frankly, in terms of like pop culture, and I'm very excited because it's not romanticism. Sorry, let's define some terms here. It's not romanticism in the idea of like, "Ooh, I love you." That is part of romanticism, but that's not what romanticism is about. Romanticism um, is about being in touch with the feelings. Um, and next week is going to be our like really hard look at like proto romanticism. Shakespeare is considered to be one of like the finest proto romanticists. By the way, that's why Shakespeare is so popular in American curriculum because of the effect that he did have on romanticism and the effects that romanticism has had on United States culture. Um, but that all started with the Renaissance, and the Renaissance was about um, structuralism and it was about formalizing things. And that's part of what I want to look at this week is I want you guys to go through and actually look at the structure of Petrarch's poetry. You'll notice we have not had a whole lot of other lyric poetry this semester. That is because I personally, just as a human being, um, I don't like lyric poetry all that much. Um, it's just not my genre. We've done epic poetry for sure, um, we have done other poetic styles, like theater has a lot of poetic elements to it. We did some poetry in our sacred text unit as well. The Bhagavad Gita is a fantastic example of that one. The Quran um, is another one, but generally, I don't, for my own self, do a whole lot with poetry. I see its value, all of that. I absolutely teach it, but it's just not what I turn to, which makes me a little bit of an oddball, I'm told, in literary circles. I think I own one collection of poetry by Ruby Kaur. Um, but I do. I want you to take some time really looking at the structure of that one because the purpose of that structure um, is not dissimilar from the ideas of like music theory that also grew out of the Renaissance, which is if we can start formalizing these things, then they're going to be easier for other people to start working with. Um, and arguably, it is because of the Renaissance that like memes can exist in the way that they do in our culture because it gives us a very particular structure that then everybody can play with. Um, and that is both graphic and um, verbal memes, but that's also like the memes that go around on TikTok, the TikTok trends, those are all mimetic in nature. And it's not that we wouldn't have found some way to do those anyway. Human beings were doing those before the Renaissance. Um, but there's some very clear Renaissance influences on all of those things that we can see. And I think that that's very significant. Also, this week we're looking at The Prince um, by Machiavelli, which hits very close to home um, right now with the world we are currently that we are currently living in, and the general dissatisfaction that most Americans have felt with most politicians since, well, basically since I was born, since the 90s at the very least. Um, because Machiavellian theory has been part of politics um, and political theory and political science since it was originally written. Um, but as people have become less familiar with it, then I feel like it has become significantly more naked and significantly less nuanced than it had been for a while in there. You know, if you look at like early American politicians, they were being remarkably Machiavellian, and they would have been very comfortable saying that that's what they were doing. And then there was this period where like that kind of went away, and they were still being Machiavellian, but they were sort of hiding it. And now we're to the point where they're not doing that. They're not hiding it anymore, but they're also not admitting that they're doing it. So it's very interesting to me, and I want you guys to have those foundations to work with um, as well throughout the week. We're doing our journal on saunas, the quizzes over the Heptameron, and then we're covering all of it over in our discussion board. You guys do get to write a little bit of poetry for me this week. Don't worry, it doesn't have to be good. I'm just looking for those formal elements there. Although if it does spark something within you, then hey, more power to you. Um, and again, just in the back of your mind, keep that final research paper because that is going to be coming due at the end of next week, our last week of class. So I will see you guys in the discussion boards and in another video at the end of the week. And until then, have a good one.